1,000 hours. At 35,000 feet above the calm Caribbean Sea, the silence was suddenly shattered by warning tones and rising tension. On a Venezuelan runway, a Su-30MK two-flanker rolled into position and lifted into the sky with a clear order: intercept and challenge the aircraft ahead. Inside the fighter's cockpit, the radar showed one bright return, a B-52H Stratofortress moving steadily through international airspace. The Venezuelan pilot seemed certain he had the advantage. He pushed the aircraft harder, increased power, and closed the distance with confidence. This was not a simple escort. He wanted to send a message. He swept in fast, cutting dangerously close across the nose of the B-52 at nearly 500 knots. The turbulence from his engines slammed into the bomber's frame, rocking the massive aircraft, but the American crew stayed composed. They did not turn away. They did not climb. They did not descend. They simply held their course. That calm reaction only increased the pressure inside the Su-30 cockpit. The pilot moved to activate his targeting systems and placed the crosshair over the center of the B-52's fuselage. The N001VEP radar began transmitting, and warning indicators confirmed that the bomber had been tracked. A countdown appeared on the display: 15 seconds. In that moment, the encounter crossed from intimidation into something far more serious. His finger moved toward the final command. Then everything changed. The Su-30's advanced radar screen suddenly filled with dozens of false returns. 50 ghost targets appeared at once. Then the display flashed white. Seconds later, it went completely dark. The pilot had not realized that for the last 40 minutes, he had been flying directly into an electronic control zone shaped by the U.S. Navy. He thought he was facing one bomber. In reality, he had entered a carefully managed network of sensors, aircraft, ships, and silent systems watching every move. The B-52 was only what he was meant to see. This is how America controlled the encounter without launching a single missile. The story did not begin when the Su-30 appeared on radar. It began hours earlier, inside a briefing room. The mission assigned to the B-52H Stratofortress was straightforward: a freedom of navigation and overflight operation. Its route had been calculated with precision, staying outside the 12 nautical mile limit of Venezuelan-claimed territorial waters. This was not designed as an attack. It was a message written across the sky at 35,000 feet. International airspace remains open to all. The U.S. military expected a reaction. In fact, the mission was built around that possibility. To the Venezuelan pilot, the radar picture looked simple: one large aircraft, one visible target, one opportunity to pressure the Americans. But that picture was incomplete by design. The first unseen layer was far away, an E-3 Sentry AWACS orbiting safely hundreds of miles from the encounter. This was not just an aircraft with a large radar dome, it was a flying command center built to turn a confusing airspace into a controlled battle space. Its legacy goes back to modern air campaigns, where airborne command aircraft helped coordinate thousands of missions, track aircraft movement, and reduce confusion in the sky. That same experience was now being used over the Caribbean. The moment the Su-30 left the runway, it appeared on the E-3 operator's screen. Its speed, altitude, heading, and climb rate were recorded instantly. The fighter was no longer operating in the dark. Every movement became part of a much larger American picture. That information did not remain inside the AWACS. It flowed immediately through Link 16, the secure tactical data network used to connect aircraft, ships, and command centers in real time. Through that network, an F-22 pilot, a commander aboard an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, and personnel in a command center in Florida could all see the same air picture at the same time. There was no guessing, no confusion, no need for radio chatter that might reveal positions. Everyone on the American side was working from one shared view of the sky. And then came the final unseen layer, the B-52's real protection. Two F-22 Raptors were already in the area, flying under strict emission control. Their own APG-77 radars were silent. They were not broadcasting. They were not announcing their presence. To the Su-30's sensors, they might as well have been invisible. They did not need to search for the Venezuelan fighter because the AWACS had already done that for them. The Su-30's position was being fed directly into their cockpit displays. Their mission was not to look. Their mission was to wait, track, and be ready. At this stage, the F-22's most important tool was not its radar, but its ALR-94 electronic warfare suite. This system is designed to detect, classify, and analyze signals from other aircraft without revealing the Raptor's own location. It listens quietly, studies the electronic behavior of the opposing aircraft, and builds a precise picture without needing to speak. That capability had already proven itself in complex air environments, including regions protected by advanced Russian-made air defense systems. The F-22 was built for exactly this kind of moment, silent, patient, and almost impossible to detect until it was too late to change the outcome. The Venezuelan pilot believed he was pressuring a lone bomber, but the B-52 was never alone. Above him, behind him, and far beyond his radar's reach, an entire network was already in motion. The AWACS had tracked him from takeoff. Link 16 had shared his position across the force. The Navy had shaped the electronic environment around him. And the F-22s had been watching quietly, ready to respond if he made one more move. So when his radar display collapsed into confusion, it was not a malfunction. It was a warning. The message was clear. You are not controlling this situation. The Su-30 had entered the encounter believing speed and pressure would force the Americans to react. Instead, it found itself inside a system designed to stay calm, stay connected, and dominate without making the first visible move. The B-52 continued forward, steady and unchanged. Its crew remained silent. The fighter's radar remained unreliable, and the pilot, who only minutes earlier believed he had the upper hand, suddenly understood that the sky around him was far larger than the screen in front of him. The most powerful move that day was not a missile. It was not a dramatic turn. It was not a chase. It was control. America had created a situation where every option available to the Su-30 had already been seen, measured, and answered before the pilot even realized it. The bomber kept flying, the Raptor stayed hidden, the network stayed active, and the confrontation ended exactly the way Washington wanted it to end. With no shot fired, no public escalation, and one unmistakable message left hanging over the Caribbean sky. The aircraft the Venezuelan pilot tried to intimidate was never the real challenge. The real challenge was the invisible system surrounding it. They did not simply slip past S-300 and S-400 radar coverage, they quietly studied it. Without transmitting, they mapped positions, patterns, and capabilities, building a detailed electronic picture while the other side had no idea its systems were being analyzed. So, as the Venezuelan pilot prepared his high-speed approach, he was acting on a dangerous misunderstanding. He believed he was the one in control, closing in on a slow, isolated bomber. In reality, he was the only aircraft in the encounter without the full picture, flying straight into an environment already shaped around him. The B-52 was the fixed point, steady and unmoved. The AWACS was the eye above the horizon, watching every movement. And the F-22s were the silent force in the background, waiting without revealing themselves. Then the Venezuelan pilot made the move that changed everything. The moment his thumb shifted the target designation control, the Su-30's avionics responded. Its NOO-1VEP radar, which had been scanning a wide 120-degree area ahead of the aircraft, narrowed its focus into a tight beam only 2.5 degrees wide. This was single-target tracking mode, the final and most revealing step before committing to a launch sequence. For the Su-30, it offered a cleaner firing solution, but electronically it was like switching on a spotlight in a dark room. The fighter was now sending a concentrated stream of X-band radar energy directly toward the B-52. To gain precision, the pilot had sacrificed awareness. He was no longer scanning the wider sky. He had locked his attention onto one aircraft, and in doing so, he exposed himself. That focus beam instantly became a bright signal in the electromagnetic spectrum. Nearby, an EA-18G Growler was listening. The Growler's ALQ-218 tactical receiver detected the emission, classified it, and identified the pattern almost immediately. It did not just notice energy in the air, it recognized a signature. In the rear cockpit, the electronic warfare officer saw the system label appear on the display. Flanker Tracking Mode. The Su-30 had revealed both its identity and its intent. The response began quietly. The electronic warfare officer activated the ALQ-99 jamming pod mounted beneath the Growler's wing. Inside the pod, the DRFM system, digital radio frequency memory, began its work. It did not simply block the radar signal. It captured it, sampled it, and recreated it with extreme precision in a matter of nanoseconds. This was not ordinary interference. It was real-time signal cloning. The Su-30's radar had handed over its own electronic fingerprint, and the Growler turned that fingerprint into a tool. The system moved from listening to deception. The DRFM processor took the copied radar signal and began reshaping it into dozens of false returns. Soon, the Su-30's radar was being fed 50 convincing targets. These were not random flashes or meaningless static. Each false return was carefully built, with its own simulated Doppler shift to suggest movement, its own echo strength to suggest distance, and its own behavior to look believable to the radar processor. To the Su-30, every one of them appeared real enough to demand attention. Then came the overwhelming part. The electronic warfare officer ordered the ALQ-99 transmitters to push those false signals back toward the Su-30 with far greater strength. The fighter's radar may have been transmitting around 1 kilowatt of power, but the Growler's system could concentrate its output into an effective radiated power many times stronger. The Su-30 had sent out a focused call. The Growler answered with a wall of electronic force. The effect inside the Su-30's radar system was immediate. A processor built to manage only a limited number of tracks was suddenly flooded with 50 high-priority returns, all arriving with strong signal strength and believable movement data. The system was forced to sort through too much information at once. It was like overwhelming a computer network with more requests than it was designed to handle, except this was happening inside a combat aircraft's radar system in real time. The software could not make sense of the conflicting data. To protect itself, it triggered a built-in safety response. The radar faced a simple choice: continue under impossible load or shut down before serious damage occurred. It chose survival. Power was cut to the radar array. Inside the cockpit, the Venezuelan pilot was suddenly pushed into an electronic blank space. The sharp warning tone of the target track vanished. The confident radar picture disappeared. The single clear target he had been focused on was replaced by confusion, then nothing. One moment, he believed he had the bomber centered and under control. The next, his most important sensor was gone. His radar display, which moments earlier had shown a clear and confident picture of the target, became nothing more than a dark, lifeless reflection of his own stunned face. He had entered the encounter holding what he believed was a digital spear, but an unseen opponent had reached through the electronic space around him and broken that spear before he could use it. Inside the Su-30 cockpit, the silence felt heavier than the alarms. Only seconds earlier, the Venezuelan pilot had felt like the dominant force in the sky, closing in with speed, power, and certainty. Now he was sitting inside a machine worth tens of millions of dollars, but without its most important senses. In that moment, the aircraft was still flying, but its advantage had been stripped away. He had not been physically touched. He had been neutralized electronically. The most unsettling part was that he had never seen the system that stopped him. There was no dramatic flash outside the canopy, no visible opponent crossing his path, no obvious moment of impact. His aircraft had simply lost the one thing he trusted most: the ability to understand the space around him. Ground control did not need to tell him what to do. Instinct took over. He rolled the fighter into a defensive split S, turning the aircraft upside down before dropping the nose and diving away. With the engines pushed hard, he accelerated back toward the safety of Venezuelan airspace, leaving the encounter as quickly as he had entered it. And just like that, the chase was over. Not with an explosion, not with a dramatic final move, just with a quiet update in the B-52's mission record. Interceptor departed. Mission continues. Coffee still warm. For the American crew, this had not been a moment of panic. It had not even been a surprise. It was a sequence they had trained for, a situation already expected, measured, and managed. Their calm was not arrogance. It was confidence in the network surrounding them. But imagine a different outcome. What if the Venezuelan pilot, frustrated and cornered, had tried to push further? What if he had attempted to use a close-range heat-seeking system, relying on visual contact and proximity instead of his disabled radar? That is where the hidden trap would have closed completely. The two F-22 Raptors, which had been silently observing from outside his awareness, would have shifted from passive tracking to active response. They had already been following his movement through shared data, staying quiet, unseen, and ready. Before the Su-30 pilot could properly establish visual control, the Raptors could have released long-range air-to-air interceptors from beyond the range where he could realistically react. They would not have needed to light up their own radars from the beginning. Initial guidance would have come through the wider tactical network, with the interceptors navigating toward the target area before activating their own seekers only near the final stage. For the Su-30 pilot, the warning would have come far too late. There would be no long buildup, no dramatic duel, no fair contest in the sky. One moment, he would believe he still had options. The next, the tactical picture would have changed without asking his permission. That is the difference between a pilot relying on one aircraft and a force relying on an entire connected system. And if the situation had expanded from the ground, the outcome would have become even more one-sided. If Venezuela had activated its advanced S-300VM air defense batteries in response to the embarrassment, those systems would have immediately revealed themselves. The moment their search radars began transmitting, they would stop being hidden guardians and become bright electronic markers on the American network. From that point, the response would not be chaotic, it would be procedural. Airborne electronic platforms would locate and classify the radar emissions. Specialized radar-seeking systems could be assigned to pressure those emitters. At the same time, naval platforms positioned offshore could coordinate precision strikes against command nodes, launch positions, and supporting infrastructure. It would not look like an old-fashioned air battle. It would look like a carefully timed electronic operation carried out in stages, with each signal collected, each location mapped, and each decision made from a shared picture of the battle space. This is the harsh lesson behind the Caribbean encounter. Modern air combat is no longer decided by who can turn harder, climb faster, or perform the more dramatic maneuver. Those things still matter, but they are no longer the center of the game. The real contest is awareness. Who sees first? Who understands the full picture? Who can connect aircraft, ships, satellites, command centers, and electronic sensors into one living network? The Venezuelan pilot saw one airplane. The American force saw an entire three-dimensional environment. From high above, orbital systems were feeding information into the network. At sea, ships were tracking the wider area. In the air, AWACS platforms were managing the picture. Electronic warfare aircraft were listening for every signal. Stealth fighters were positioned quietly in the background. Even assets far below the surface could be part of the same strategic web. Every platform was a sensor. Every sensor was a node. Every node strengthened the same picture. That is what the pilot in the Su-30 never truly understood. He believed he was entering a contest between two aircraft. In reality, he was entering a contest between one aircraft and a system built to see, process, and respond faster than any single pilot could manage alone. He had speed, he had confidence, he had a capable fighter. But he did not have the full picture. And in modern combat aviation, that is the difference between control and confusion. This is also the difference between a force designed to look impressive during parades and a force built to operate as a global military machine. One depends on individual aircraft, bold maneuvers, and dramatic pressure. The other depends on discipline, coordination, data, timing, and integration. One tries to intimidate, the other quietly takes control of the entire environment. That is why the B-52 never changed course. That is why the crew did not react emotionally. That is why the hidden fighters stayed silent. That is why the electronic response came at the exact moment the Su-30 exposed itself. The Americans did not need to prove anything with a dramatic move. The system proved it for them. The Su-30 came close enough to send a message, but instead received one. It learned that approaching a visible aircraft does not mean you understand what surrounds it. It learned that a radar screen can lie. It learned that the aircraft you can see may be the least important part of the encounter. So what is the real lesson of those 40 minutes over the Caribbean? It is not simply a story about an advanced fighter being outplayed by stealth aircraft. It is not just a story about electronic warfare or radar interference. It is a story about how modern power works. The visible aircraft was only the surface. Behind it was a command network. Behind that network were sensors. Behind those sensors were ships, aircraft, analysts, and decision-makers, all sharing the same information in real time. The Venezuelan pilot entered the sky thinking he was challenging a bomber, but the bomber was never alone. It was the front edge of a much larger system, one that had already identified him, tracked him, studied him, and prepared several responses before he even understood the situation. That is why the encounter ended without a visible clash. The B-52 kept flying. The Raptors stayed unseen. The Growler remained in control of the electronic space. The network stayed connected, and the Su-30 turned away. No dramatic announcement was needed. No public escalation was required. The message had already been delivered silently at 35,000 feet. In the skies above the Caribbean, the most powerful force was not speed. It was not noise. It was not intimidation. It was control. And for 40 minutes, one side had all of it. It goes much deeper than a single tense moment in the sky. This was a collision between two completely different ways of thinking. The Venezuelan pilot was flying a powerful and highly capable aircraft, but he approached the encounter with an old mindset. He trusted his personal skill, his courage, and the raw performance of the machine around him. He saw the world through the glass of his cockpit, and from that narrow view, he believed he was the one in control. But the U.S. Air Force and Navy do not operate on that level anymore. They are not focused on one aircraft alone. They see the entire environment. They see a living network of information where every platform has a purpose. The B-52 is the visible piece on the board. The AWACS is the brain coordinating the picture. The Growler controls the electronic space. And the Raptor waits unseen, ready to respond if the situation demands it. In this kind of system, even the most talented pilot is only one part of a much larger structure. Real power is no longer measured only by speed, altitude, or maneuverability. It is measured by who can gather information first, understand it faster, and act with the most precision. The Venezuelan pilot thought he was entering a contest between aircraft. The Americans were playing a completely different game. That is why the B-52 was there in the first place. It was not simply flying a route, it was making a statement. It was testing reactions, measuring behavior, and proving that in the modern age, control of the sky is not won by dramatic turns or aggressive flybys. It is won quietly. It is won in the invisible space of signals, sensors, processors, and shared data. It is won by the ability to connect aircraft, ships, satellites, and command centers into one seamless picture. The Venezuelan pilot saw a single bomber. The U.S. force saw a real-time three-dimensional grid with every movement tracked and every option measured. That is the difference between looking powerful and being powerful. And then there is the final point, the one that makes the message impossible to ignore. The B-52 Stratofortress is not a new aircraft. It is a legend made of metal, wiring, and history. It has flown through the Cold War, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and decades of operations across the world. It was built in another era, yet it continues to remain relevant because it is not just an aircraft anymore. It is part of a modern network. That is what makes it so dangerous to underestimate. People see its age and think it is outdated. But the truth is, the B-52 has survived because it keeps adapting. New systems, new weapons integration, new communications, new missions. The aircraft may look like a relic from the past, but the network around it belongs entirely to the future, and that is the real lesson. Do not judge modern military power by what you can see with your eyes. The most important systems may be silent. The most important aircraft may be hidden. The most important decision may happen long before anyone realizes the situation has changed. The Su-30 pilot came close to challenge a bomber. Instead, he discovered the bomber was only the visible edge of something much larger. So now the question is this: is electronic warfare the future of air dominance, or will traditional piloting skill always have a place in the sky? Share your thoughts in the comments below.